A quarter of an inch. That's all that stood between a spilled tray of champagne and a bullet through the heart of the most dangerous man in New York. The shocking part? The person who saved him wasn't a bodyguard. It was a quiet waitress who noticed something everyone else missed. A quarter of an inch. That was the distance between an ordinary Tuesday night and a war that would shake the most dangerous corners of New York City. A quarter of an inch between a tray of champagne slipping from a waitress's hand and a sniper's bullet tearing through the heart of one of the most powerful men in the American underworld. I want you to picture the moment with me. Rain sliding down the glass walls of a luxury restaurant 42 floors above Manhattan. Crystal lights reflecting across polished marble. Wealthy people laughing over expensive wine, believing the night belongs to them. And in the middle of that glittering illusion, a tiny red dot appears. Small, silent, no bigger than a ladybug. Most people wouldn't even notice it. But someone did. And that someone was not a bodyguard, not a security expert, not a rival gangster waiting for revenge. It was a waitress. Her name was Maya Lynwood. And the strange thing about stories like this is that when you look back, you realize everything hinged on one instinctive choice made in less than a second. Most people run when they see danger. Most people freeze when glass shatters. But Maya Lynwood did something else entirely. She threw herself forward and tackled the most dangerous man in New York City, just as a sniper's bullet exploded through the window behind him. That single moment changed everything. It started a chain of events that would expose betrayal, ignite a power struggle, and pull one ordinary woman into a world she never should have entered. A world of hidden empires, silent wars, and a man whose enemies were powerful enough to try to erase him from existence. But before we go any further into that night, let me say something quickly. Welcome to Rose's Stories. If you enjoy deep, intense stories where love, danger, and power collide in unexpected ways, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you more stories like this. Because the one you're about to hear isn't just about crime or revenge. It's about how a single moment can completely rewrite the direction of a life. And honestly, the reason stories like this fascinate me is because they always start with something deceptively small. Not a war, not a grand plan, just a tiny detail that most people overlook. A reflection in a window, a flicker of red light. A waitress who spent her entire life learning how to notice things others ignore. That night, Maya Lynwood was exhausted. 9 hours into a shift, she hadn't even been scheduled to work. Her shoes were too small. Her rent was already 3 weeks late. Her mother's medical bills were stacked on the kitchen counter like a silent threat waiting to collapse her entire life. She wasn't thinking about danger. She was thinking about tips, about getting through the night, about surviving another month. But fate has a strange sense of timing. Because at exactly 8:15 p.m., the elevator doors of the Obsidian Room opened, and a man walked in who carried power the way storms carry thunder. Gabriel Moretti, 34 years old, head of one of the most feared criminal syndicates in New York. A man whose name was whispered in places where ordinary people never listen. Tall, elegant, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maya earned in a year. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a prince who had already killed the king. 2 men followed behind him, one massive enough to block a doorway, the other lean, sharp-eyed, always smiling in a way that never reached his eyes. They took their seats in the corner booth beside the towering windows overlooking the rain-soaked city, and Maya Lynwood walked toward them carrying a tray. Just another invisible waitress in a room full of powerful people. But invisibility can be deceptive. Because the people who spend their lives unnoticed often develop a skill that others don't have. They learn to observe. They learn to read rooms. They learn to see the small things. And at exactly 9:02 p.m., when Maya approached the table holding a dessert menu, she noticed something no one else in that restaurant saw. A tiny red dot resting directly over Gabriel Moretti's heart. Time didn't slow down. It stretched. Her brain began calculating angles before she even understood what she was seeing. The building across the street, the reflection in the glass, the stillness of the dot, and suddenly one word formed in her mind. Sniper. Gabriel lifted his wine glass. If he leaned forward, the bullet might miss. If he stayed still, he would die. Maya didn't think about her job. She didn't think about the consequences of touching a man like Gabriel Moretti. She didn't think at all. She dropped the menus and screamed, "Down!" Then she launched herself forward. And in the exact same moment that her shoulder slammed into Gabriel's chest, the window behind them exploded. And the truth is, moments like that don't come out of nowhere. They come from a lifetime of learning how to see what other people ignore. The strange thing about Maya Lynwood is that nothing about her life suggested she would ever be standing in the center of a story like this. If you had walked past her on the street that morning, you probably wouldn't have looked twice. She was 26 years old, tired in the way people get tired when rest stops meaning anything. Not dramatic exhaustion, not the kind you complain about over coffee. The quiet kind that lives in your bones after years of working just hard enough to stay one step ahead of falling apart. She grew up moving through the foster system, the kind of childhood where you learn early that stability is temporary and attention can be dangerous. Some homes were fine, some were not, but all of them taught the same lesson. The safest place in a room is often the place where nobody is looking. So Maya became very good at that. Quiet, observant, the kind of person who learned to read the emotional temperature of a room the moment she walked into it. When voices shifted, when someone's smile was fake, when trouble was about to arrive. By the time she reached adulthood, that instinct had turned into something practical. Survival, mostly. She worked 3 jobs when she could get them. Morning shifts at a small cafe in Queens where construction workers ordered burnt coffee and egg sandwiches before sunrise. Evening classes she hoped would someday lead to something more stable than service work. And at night, the Obsidian Room, a restaurant so expensive it almost felt like another country compared to the neighborhood where she lived. Her apartment was barely large enough for a bed, a narrow kitchen counter, and a stack of envelopes she avoided opening whenever possible. Most of those envelopes were medical bills. Her mother, Linda, lived in a long-term care facility in Queens after early dementia had slowly erased the life she used to recognize. Some days she remembered Maya's name. Some days she thought Maya was a nurse. On the hardest days, she looked at her daughter like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room. So Maya worked. Constantly. Every hour meant one less bill waiting to crush her. Every tip meant maybe another week before the facility started calling again. The Obsidian Room was the best-paying job she had, which is why she never complained when the shifts ran long or the clients treated the staff like furniture. Places like that operate on a quiet hierarchy. Wealth sits at the tables. Power sits in the corners. And the people carrying trays learn to move like ghosts. Invisible. That invisibility was part of the training. You refill glasses without interrupting conversations. You clear plates without drawing attention. You stand close enough to hear what someone wants before they ask for it, but far enough away that they forget you're there at all. Most nights, that invisibility was simply exhausting. But on that particular night, it became something else. Because while the room was busy watching Gabriel Moretti, studying the man whose reputation traveled through New York like weather, Maya was watching everything else. The subtle shift in the way the staff straightened when he walked in. The careful positioning of his bodyguards. The way the conversations around the room lowered just a little, the way people do when they know power has entered the space. Gabriel himself said almost nothing. That was another detail she noticed. Powerful people rarely need to talk loudly. They carry a kind of gravity that bends the room around them. His posture was relaxed but deliberate, the kind of control that suggests a man who has learned to expect danger without showing it. But the longer Maya moved through the dining room, the more she noticed something else about him. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from working too many hours. Something deeper than that. The kind of exhaustion that comes from living in a world where trust is rare and mistakes cost lives. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. And most people in that restaurant weren't. But Maya had spent most of her life studying details exactly like that. And that is why, when the reflection of a tiny red light appeared in the window behind him, her brain recognized the pattern before the rest of the room even realized something was wrong. Because people who grow up surrounded by chaos develop a strange kind of awareness. They learn that danger rarely announces itself loudly. More often, it appears quietly, like a red dot resting over someone's heart. And once a moment like that appears, the world doesn't slow down the way movies like to pretend it does. It collapses forward. The instant after Maya saw the red, everything moved too fast for fear to catch up. Her body reacted before her thoughts could form a sentence. When she drove her shoulder into Gabriel Moretti and forced him backward, the impact knocked the air out of both of them. The velvet booth behind him absorbed the force just as the window exploded. The sound was violent and sharp, like the air itself had cracked open. Glass burst inward across the room, scattering over tables and marble floors. Somewhere in the chaos, someone screamed. Chairs scraped. A bottle shattered. But the most remarkable part of that moment wasn't the panic. It was how quickly Gabriel's world snapped into motion. Men who lived in danger tend to react differently than everyone else. There was no confusion in the movements around him. Elias was already moving before the last pieces of glass had even hit the floor. One massive arm flipped the dining table sideways to form a barrier while the other hand pulled a pistol from beneath his jacket with frightening speed. "Stay down," he barked. Across the restaurant, Nico Vesperi had already grabbed a radio from inside his suit. His voice cut sharply through the noise as he issued instructions to security teams outside the building. But Gabriel himself didn't move right away. Instead, he looked directly at the woman who had just thrown herself on top of him. Maya was shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. A thin line of blood ran down the side of her temple where a shard of glass had cut through her skin. She didn't even seem aware of it. Gabriel reached up slowly and touched the blood on her cheek with 2 fingers, studying it almost absently before looking back at her face. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was calm in a way that felt almost unnatural compared to the chaos filling the room. I saw it," Maya stammered. The red dot. For a brief second, something changed in his expression. Recognition. Understanding. Behind them, Nico turned sharply when he heard her words. His eyes moved toward the shattered window, calculating angles, distances, rooftops. "Clear the building," he ordered into the radio. "Now." Elias leaned closer to Gabriel, his voice low but urgent. "We have to move." But Gabriel was still looking at Maya. There's something fascinating about that moment when someone powerful realizes the person in front of them might be more important than they first assumed. In Gabriel's world, survival depended on understanding people quickly. Motives, alliances, weaknesses. Every action had a reason, and the question forming in his mind was simple. Why would a waitress risk her life for him? He grabbed Maya's wrist firmly as Elias pulled him to his feet. "She comes with us," Gabriel said. Elias frowned. "Boss, she's a civilian." She saw the shooter. That was enough. Within seconds they were moving through the back of the restaurant, escorted by armed security staff who cleared a path through the kitchen. Cooks pressed themselves against stainless steel counters as the group rushed past. Maya barely understood what was happening anymore. One moment she had been holding dessert menus. The next she was being guided through a narrow service hallway toward the rear exit. The night air outside felt cold and damp after the heat of the restaurant. A black SUV waited with the engine already running. Doors opened. Hands guided her inside. And then the vehicle surged into traffic, tires spraying water across the pavement as Manhattan lights blurred past the windows. Inside the armored car, the energy shifted again. The panic stayed behind with the broken glass and screaming diners. Here, the silence was heavier. Gabriel removed his damaged jacket slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate. From beneath his pant leg, he drew a compact handgun and checked the chamber with practiced ease. Only then did he look at Maya again. The passing streetlights cut across his face, revealing the sharp focus in his eyes. He studied her the way a strategist studies an unexpected variable on a battlefield. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya," she whispered. "Maya Lynwood." Gabriel nodded once, leaning slightly closer. "Who do you work for, Maya?" She blinked. "The restaurant." "I don't mean the restaurant." His voice lowered. "Who sent you to save my life?" And the moment that question left his mouth, Maya realized something that hadn't fully settled in yet. Saving Gabriel Moretti hadn't ended the danger. It had only moved her deeper into it. The drive out of Manhattan stretched longer than she expected. At first the city still surrounded them, traffic lights reflecting on wet pavement, late-night taxis drifting through intersections, neon signs glowing against the rain. But little by little the skyline began to fade behind them. Towers turned into bridges. Bridges turned into highways. And eventually even the distant glow of the city became nothing more than a faint shimmer in the rearview mirror. No one in the SUV spoke for several minutes. Nico's voice occasionally broke the silence from the front seat as he coordinated something through his phone, issuing quiet instructions to people Maya couldn't see. Elias sat rigid beside the door, scanning every passing vehicle like a man expecting danger to appear at any second. Gabriel, however, seemed strangely calm. He watched the road ahead with the kind of stillness that suggested his mind was working through 100 possibilities at once. The suspicion he had shown in the restaurant hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had sharpened. In a world like his, coincidences were rare. Someone had tried to kill him in a room full of witnesses, using a method that didn't entirely make sense. And the one person who had prevented it was a woman who claimed she had simply noticed a reflection in the glass. From where he sat, that explanation raised as many questions as it answered. Eventually, the SUV turned off the highway onto a long gravel road surrounded by dark trees. The forest seemed to swallow the sound of the engine as they moved deeper into the property. Maya leaned slightly toward the window, trying to see where they were going, but the only thing visible beyond the headlights was shadow. Then the house appeared. It didn't look like the kind of place someone simply lived in. Glass walls rose out of the trees like a modern fortress, all sharp angles and quiet strength. Concrete and steel framed wide windows that reflected the surrounding forest, almost camouflaging the structure in darkness. Security lights flickered on as the SUV approached, illuminating the driveway. The car rolled to a stop. Before Maya could gather her thoughts, Elias opened the door and motioned for her to step out. Cold air rushed across her face. The forest smelled clean compared to the city, damp with rain and pine. For a brief moment the silence felt surreal, like she had stepped into an entirely different world. Inside, the house was even more unsettling in its calm. Minimal furniture, polished floors, long corridors where footsteps echoed softly. Everything about the space suggested control, efficiency, a place designed less for comfort than for security. A woman appeared almost immediately from a side hallway, her posture straight and alert. She wore simple black clothing, but the way she moved made it obvious she wasn't a housekeeper. Her eyes scanned Maya quickly, professionally. "Search her," Gabriel said. The woman stepped forward without hesitation. Maya stiffened as quick hands checked her pockets, sleeves, and shoes. The woman removed Maya's phone and slipped it into her own pocket. "Hey," Maya protested quietly. "I need that." "You'll get it back later," the woman replied. The words were calm, but they carried a weight that made Maya uneasy. When the search was finished, Elias guided her toward a large study at the far end of the house. Warm light flickered from a fireplace inside. Gabriel was already standing near it, pouring himself a glass of whiskey as if the night had been nothing more than an inconvenience. He turned when Maya entered. For a moment the two of them simply looked at each other. It was the first quiet moment they had shared since the attack. "Drink," he said, holding the glass toward her. She shook her head immediately. "I want to go home." Gabriel didn't argue. He took a slow sip of the whiskey instead, then set the glass down. "You can't go home." The certainty in his voice sent a chill through her. "Why not?" "Because whoever tried to kill me tonight failed." He stepped closer, his expression thoughtful rather than threatening. "And people who fail tend to try again." Maya felt her stomach tighten. "What does that have to do with me?" Gabriel studied her carefully, weighing his words. "You ruined their plan," he said quietly. "Which means you're now part of it." The realization settled over her slowly. The world she had known, late shifts, overdue bills, quiet subway rides back to Queens, suddenly felt impossibly far away. "So what am I now?" she asked. "A prisoner." Gabriel considered the word, then shook his head. "A guest," he said. "Under protection." He crouched slightly, so their eyes were level. "And tomorrow," he added, "you're going to help me figure out who inside my own empire wanted me dead." And when Gabriel said that someone inside his own empire might want him dead, the atmosphere in that quiet house changed in a way that's hard to describe. The danger suddenly felt closer. Not somewhere across the city, not hidden on a distant rooftop, but already standing somewhere inside the same circle of trust that had protected him for years. The next morning arrived with an almost unsettling calm. Sunlight filtered through the glass walls of the estate, spreading pale gold across the floors. Outside, the forest looked peaceful enough to belong to another world entirely. Birds moved through the trees. Wind brushed softly through the branches. Nothing about the scene suggested that less than 12 hours earlier, a man had nearly been assassinated in a Manhattan restaurant. Maya woke in a room that felt larger than the entire apartment she had left behind in Queens. For a few seconds, she simply stared at the ceiling, trying to understand how her life had shifted so violently overnight. Her head throbbed slightly where the glass had cut her temple, the bandage reminding her that none of this was a dream. When she stepped into the hallway, Elias was already waiting at the far end like a silent guard statue. He gave her a brief nod toward a bright glass room overlooking the trees. "Breakfast," he said. The words sounded strangely normal considering everything that had happened. Gabriel Moretti sat at the table inside the solarium, a cup of coffee in front of him and a tablet displaying security reports. In daylight, he looked different. Less like the untouchable figure who had walked into the restaurant the night before, and more like a man who carried an enormous amount of responsibility on his shoulders. He looked up as Maya entered. "You should eat," he said calmly. She didn't sit down. "I want my phone," she replied. Gabriel slid a sleek device across the table toward her. It wasn't the same phone she had lost during the search. "I had someone check yours for tracking software," he said. "Use that for now." Maya stared at the screen for a moment before looking back at him. "I need to call my mother." "You don't have to." He took a sip of coffee. "I already contacted the care facility." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "The next 12 months of her medical expenses have been paid." For a second, Maya didn't speak. The relief hit her unexpectedly, like a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Gabriel said quietly. "I did." There was something in his tone that suggested the matter wasn't up for debate. He tapped the tablet and rotated it toward her. A digital floor plan of the obsidian room appeared on the screen. "I've been reviewing the attack," he said. "Security believes the sniper was positioned on the rooftop of the bank across the street." Maya leaned closer to examine the diagram. "That would make sense." "It does," Gabriel agreed. "Except for one detail." He paused. "The laser." Maya looked up. "Professional shooters don't use visible laser sights for long-distance shots. It risks revealing their position." "So why use one?" she asked. Gabriel's expression darkened slightly. "Unless they wanted someone to see it." The realization moved slowly through Maya's thoughts. "You mean they expected a reaction?" "Yes." "If you had leaned forward," she continued, thinking through the geometry of the room, "the bullet might have missed." "And if I moved sideways to avoid it," Gabriel finished, "I could have walked directly into a second shooter." The room fell quiet. Maya leaned back slightly, absorbing what that meant. "This wasn't just an assassination attempt," she said softly. "It was choreography." Gabriel nodded. "And someone inside my organization helped stage it." That was the moment he revealed the second part of the plan. "Tonight," he said, "the leaders of the 5 families are meeting to discuss the attack." Maya frowned. "And you want me there?" "Yes." Her laugh came out short and incredulous. "I'm a waitress." "Not tonight." Gabriel stood and walked slowly around the table until he stood just behind her chair. "Tonight," he said, "you're my fiancée." Maya blinked. "That's your plan." "It explains why you're with me," he replied calmly. "It explains why a civilian is suddenly close to the center of the conversation." "And what exactly do you expect me to do at a table full of crime bosses?" "Watch them." His voice lowered slightly. "You see details other people miss." She remembered the way Nico had spoken the night before, the tension in his voice when he thought no one else was listening. "You think one of them was involved?" "I know one of them was." Maya crossed her arms, weighing the risk. "You're asking me to walk into a room full of powerful men who might want you dead." Gabriel met her eyes. "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "And if I refuse?" His answer came without hesitation. "Then I can't guarantee your safety outside this house." It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Maya looked out through the glass walls at the quiet forest beyond. Her life had already changed the moment she tackled Gabriel in that restaurant. There was no easy way back. "Fine," she said finally. Gabriel raised an eyebrow slightly. "Fine. If I die tonight," she replied, "I'm haunting you." For the first time since the attack, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough." And that was how Maya Lynwood found herself preparing to walk into a gathering of some of the most dangerous men in New York, not as a waitress this time, but as the woman standing beside Gabriel Moretti. And that is how Maya Lynwood found herself stepping into a room where every smile might hide a betrayal. The place Gabriel chose for the meeting was called The Void, an underground gallery in Chelsea that specialized in modern art and quiet discretion. From the street above, it looked like nothing more than another warehouse with tinted windows and a guarded entrance. But below ground, behind reinforced doors and soft lighting, it had become neutral territory for conversations powerful men preferred not to have in public. By the time their car arrived, the rain had started again. Thin streaks of water slid across the pavement as camera flashes burst from the small group of photographers waiting outside. Maya had barely recognized herself when she saw her reflection earlier that evening. The emerald silk dress Gabriel's staff had chosen fit perfectly, elegant without being loud. Her hair had been pinned back to reveal the line of her neck, and the diamond earrings caught the light with every movement. She looked exactly like what Gabriel had described. A beautiful distraction. But appearances are a strange thing. From the outside she looked calm, poised, almost bored by the attention. Inside, her mind was moving quickly, remembering everything Gabriel had said that morning. Watch the room. Watch the reactions. Trust the instincts that had already saved his life once. Gabriel's hand rested lightly against the small of her back as they descended the stairs into the gallery. It was a subtle gesture, but it grounded her in a way she hadn't expected. Smile, he murmured quietly near her ear. You're supposed to adore me. I'm working on it, she whispered back, forcing a polite expression as they entered the room. The gallery itself felt like a carefully designed stage. Concrete walls, metal sculptures twisted into abstract shapes, and a long steel table positioned beneath narrow beams of overhead light. Around that table sat men whose decisions shaped large portions of the city's hidden economy. Donatello Rossi arrived first, loud and theatrical, the kind of man who laughed too easily but watched everything behind his eyes. Adrian Thorne sat further down the table, quiet and precise, his English accent lending a strange calm to his sharp observations about shipping routes and financial losses. And beside them, almost motionless, was the Russian representative known simply as Volov. Nico Vesperi stood behind Gabriel's chair when they approached, his expression controlled but attentive. If there was tension between the two men, it didn't show on the surface. The meeting began with the kind of conversation that sounds almost mundane if you ignore the stakes behind it. Territories, shipments, disrupted agreements after the restaurant attack. Maya remained quiet beside Gabriel. Holding a glass of champagne she barely touched. From a distance, she looked like a woman politely enduring a boring conversation. But her eyes moved constantly. Rossi talked too much. Thorne spoke rarely, but listened carefully. Volov barely spoke at all. And Nico was watching someone else. At first Maya thought she might be imagining it. But the longer she observed, the clearer the pattern became. Volov's fingers tapped softly against his glass in a slow, steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. A moment later Nico's hand mirrored the same rhythm against the table. It was subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. But Maya had spent her entire life noticing things people overlooked. Her pulse quickened as she shifted slightly in her chair. Beneath the edge of the tablecloth, Volov's shoe nudged a small black case forward across the floor. It stopped directly beneath Gabriel's chair. Something cold moved through her stomach. She leaned closer to Gabriel, pretending to brush a stray piece of dust from his jacket. There's a case under your seat, she whispered. Gabriel didn't look down. He didn't react outwardly at all. But his posture changed almost imperceptibly. He stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back with a faint scrape. I need another drink, he announced. Rossi frowned. Sit down, Moretti. We're not finished. Gabriel reached for Maya's hand. I am. They had taken only 2 steps toward the exit when the lights went out. The darkness swallowed the room instantly. For a split second there was silence. Then gunfire erupted. The sound echoed violently against the concrete walls as automatic weapons tore through the steel table. Maya felt Gabriel pull her down just before the first burst of bullets struck the space where they had been standing. Metal rang. Glass shattered. Voices shouted over each other in confusion. Get down, someone yelled. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed against the floor beside Gabriel. In the brief flashes of muzzle fire, she could see shapes moving through the darkness. Then she heard a voice directing the attackers. A voice she recognized. Nico. The realization hit Gabriel at the same moment it hit her. He set this up, Gabriel said under his breath. Bullets sparked off a sculpture beside them as they crawled for cover. The main exit was already blocked by gunmen. We're trapped, Maya whispered. Gabriel reloaded his pistol with calm efficiency. Not panic, just calculation. Then Maya saw something through the smoke. A line of propane heaters near the gallery's back patio doors. An idea formed almost instantly. Give me your gun, she said. Gabriel looked at her in surprise. What? Trust me. For one brief moment their eyes met in the chaos. Then he handed her the weapon. And the decision Maya made next would change the entire course of that night. And in that split second, when Gabriel placed the gun in Maya's hand, something invisible shifted between them. Trust. Not the kind built slowly over years. The kind that forms in moments when there's no time left to doubt. The gallery had become a storm of noise and shadows. Gunfire echoed through the darkness, sparks jumping from metal sculptures as bullets struck the steel surfaces. Maya's ears rang from the explosion that followed when the propane heaters ignited, a violent burst of fire and pressure that tore through the back of the building. The blast forced everyone in the room to the ground, scattering attackers and shattering the fragile balance of the ambush. For a moment the chaos worked in their favor. Gabriel grabbed Maya's wrist and pulled her through the smoke toward the hole that the explosion had ripped through the wall. Cold rain hit them as they stumbled into the alley behind the gallery, the city suddenly wide open around them. They ran, not in a straight line, not with any clear destination, but with the desperate instinct of people who know staying still is the worst option. Only when the sound of gunfire faded behind them did Gabriel slow. He leaned against a brick wall in the narrow alley, his breathing uneven. At first Maya thought he was just catching his breath. Then she saw the blood. It was darker than the rainwater spreading across his shirt. Her stomach tightened. Gabriel, she said quietly. He tried to wave it off with the kind of stubborn humor people use when they know the situation is worse than they want to admit. Just a scratch. But when he shifted his hand, the truth was impossible to ignore. The bullet had grazed his side during the escape, tearing through muscle and leaving a deep wound that the adrenaline had kept hidden until now. Maya dropped to her knees beside him. Her hands moved before her thoughts did, pressing firmly against the wound the way she had seen in emergency scenes on television. You're losing too much blood, she said. Gabriel looked down at her hands, then back at her face. It struck him then that the woman kneeling in the rain beside him had already saved his life twice in less than 48 hours. The thought might have been almost absurd if it weren't so painfully real. Phone, he murmured. She reached into his coat pocket and found the small device he had given her earlier. There was only one number programmed inside. The call connected instantly. This is the cleaner, a calm voice answered. The boss has been shot, Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. We're in an alley off 24th. Stay there. The line ended. Minutes later, a gray van appeared at the end of the alley, headlights cutting through the rain. The driver stepped out quickly, carrying a black medical bag. Victor, the man known in certain circles simply as the cleaner. He worked fast, checking Gabriel's pulse and lifting his shirt to examine the wound. He's lucky, Victor muttered. Bullet missed anything vital. Lucky wasn't the word Maya would have chosen, but it was enough. Together, they lifted Gabriel into the back of the van, which had been converted into a mobile medical unit. Metal trays rattled softly as Victor worked under bright portable lights while the vehicle sped through the city. Maya stayed beside Gabriel the entire time, holding the clamp Victor handed her and doing exactly what he told her to do. She didn't look away, even when the sight of blood made her stomach twist. Hours later, the van finally stopped beneath a laundromat in the Bronx. Hidden beneath the machines was a small clinic where Victor completed the surgery. When it was over, the silence in the room felt heavier than the noise of the battle had. He'll live, Victor said at last. The relief that washed through Maya was almost overwhelming. She sank into the chair beside the bed where Gabriel now lay unconscious, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor filling the small room. For the first time since the attack, the adrenaline faded. Exhaustion replaced it. She should have left then. Nothing was forcing her to stay. But she didn't move. Instead, she cleaned the soot from Gabriel's hands with a damp cloth and waited. Sometime near dawn, Gabriel finally opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Maya sitting beside him, her head resting against the edge of the bed, asleep from pure exhaustion. He studied her quietly for a moment. In the strange logic of his world, loyalty was usually purchased or enforced. But this woman had stayed when she had every reason to disappear. When Maya woke and realized he was watching her, She smiled faintly despite the exhaustion. You're alive, she said. Gabriel's voice was rough but steady. So are you. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. You stayed. Maya shrugged softly. You still owe me a better explanation for why everyone wants you dead. Gabriel almost laughed. And in that quiet room beneath a Bronx laundromat, something deeper than survival began to form between them. Not just an alliance. Not just gratitude. Something more complicated. Because outside those walls, the city already believed Gabriel Moretti was dead. And his second-in-command, Nico Vesperi, had just begun claiming the empire that Gabriel had built. And while Gabriel slowly regained his strength in that hidden basement clinic, the world above them had already started rewriting the story of his death. According to the rumors spreading through New York's underworld, the king was gone. Victor brought the news with him each time he returned from the street. Newspapers mentioned an explosion at a private gallery in Chelsea. A few quiet articles hinted at a violent conflict between organized groups, but the details remained vague, almost intentionally blurred. What mattered more were the whispers moving through back rooms, private clubs, and encrypted phone calls. Gabriel Moretti was dead, and Nico Vesperi had stepped forward to take his place. I remember thinking how strange power really is when you look at it from the outside. A man can spend years building something that looks untouchable, only for the world to accept his disappearance in a matter of hours. No ceremony, no confirmation, just the quiet agreement that someone new now sits in the chair. Maya watched Gabriel absorb the news without visible emotion. On the second day of recovery, Victor tossed a folded newspaper onto the small metal table beside the bed. Nico's calling a summit, he said. 2 nights from now, at the penthouse. Gabriel didn't reach for the paper immediately. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, his jaw tight, as if he were replaying every decision that had led to that betrayal. My house, he said quietly. Victor nodded. Your wine, your office, your chair. That was the moment something changed in the air between them. Not panic, not anger exactly. Something colder. Resolve. Gabriel swung his legs off the edge of the bed despite the pain pulling at the stitches along his side. The movement alone was enough to make Victor shake his head. You're not ready to walk into a war, Victor said. You're barely ready to walk. But Gabriel didn't answer him. Instead, he looked toward Maya, who was sitting nearby peeling an orange with slow, thoughtful movements. You heard him, Gabriel said. He's consolidating power. If I don't stop this now, it's over. Maya looked up. For a moment she didn't speak, and I think that pause mattered. Because what she said next didn't come from impulse. It came from observation, from the strange advantage of someone who had spent years invisible to rooms full of powerful men. You're thinking about breaking in, she said. Gabriel didn't deny it. It's what they expect, Maya continued. The ghost returns, guns blazing. Chaos. Blood everywhere. Victor leaned against the counter, curious now. And you have a better idea? He asked. Maya stood and walked toward the small whiteboard mounted on the wall. With a marker, she sketched a rough outline of the penthouse floor plan Victor had pulled from old building records. You don't storm the building, she said. She drew a small stick figure beside the entrance. You walk in. Gabriel frowned. That building will be crawling with guards. Not everywhere, Maya said. Not where people stop looking. She tapped the corner of the diagram. The service entrance. Catering. Staff. For a second Gabriel didn't react. Then the idea settled into place. Maya had spent years working in restaurants, hotels, events where the richest people in the city gathered. She understood something that Gabriel and his soldiers didn't. Powerful people rarely noticed the people carrying trays. You want to infiltrate the penthouse disguised as staff, Gabriel said slowly. I want to become invisible, Maya replied. Victor let out a quiet laugh. That might actually work. Gabriel studied her carefully. You'd be walking straight into the same room as Nico. I know, Maya said. And if he recognizes you? He saw a terrified girl in a dress, she answered calmly. He won't be looking for a tired server with glasses and a hairnet. Silence filled the room again. Finally Gabriel spoke. If we do this, you follow my orders exactly. Maya met his gaze. You said you needed someone who sees what others miss. Gabriel nodded slowly. Yes. Then let me use that. The plan began forming almost immediately. Victor secured access to a catering agency scheduled for the summit. Gabriel contacted an old technical specialist who provided a small drive capable of disabling the penthouse security cameras. Maya cut her hair shorter, dyed it darker, and practiced moving the way she had during thousands of restaurant shifts. Head down, voice quiet, invisible. And as the night of the summit approached, something else became clear. They weren't just planning revenge. They were preparing to walk directly into the center of the empire that had already declared Gabriel Moretti dead. And if Maya was right, invisibility might be the most dangerous weapon in the room. And that is how the night arrived when a dead man was about to walk back into his own empire. The Moretti penthouse sat high above Manhattan, a palace of glass and steel where the city lights stretched endlessly in every direction. From the outside it looked like a celebration. Black cars lined the street below, security guards monitored the entrances, and inside the private elevator lobby men in tailored suits laughed with the forced ease of people pretending the balance of power had already been settled. Nico Vesperi stood at the center of it all. He wore one of Gabriel's suits. That detail mattered more than most people in the room realized. It was a quiet declaration, a signal that the throne had changed hands. The room was full of powerful men who had come not just to mourn the death of Gabriel Moretti, but to decide what the world would look like now that he was gone. What none of them noticed was the catering staff moving through the room with trays of champagne. One of them was Maya. Her hair was tied back beneath a net. Thick glasses softened the sharpness of her features. The oversized uniform hid the elegance that had drawn attention at the gallery only days before. She moved the way experienced servers do at large events. Quick, efficient, invisible. Champagne, sir. Thank you. No one looked twice. That was the strange advantage Maya had discovered years earlier. When people believe they hold power, they stop paying attention to the people who serve them. From the kitchen doorway, she watched the room carefully. Nico raised a glass. To a new beginning, he said, his voice carrying across the penthouse. To stability. The men around him murmured their agreement. Some were relieved. Some were cautious. But none of them expected the past to walk back through the door. Maya slipped behind the bar where the security terminal was located. The USB drive Gabriel had given her felt small and almost insignificant in her hand. But she knew exactly what it would do. A tray shattered across the room at that moment when another server dropped a stack of glasses. The sudden noise turned dozens of heads. It was the distraction she needed. She slid the drive into the port. A quiet progress bar appeared on the screen. 10%, 20, 50. When the number reached 100, the security cameras went dark. Maya tapped the small earpiece hidden beneath her hair. You're clear. High above the penthouse, Gabriel Moretti descended through the service elevator shaft. When the elevator doors opened moments later, he stepped out into the corridor like a ghost returning to reclaim unfinished business. The first guard barely had time to react before Gabriel disarmed him. By the time Gabriel walked into the main room, the music had already stopped. The conversation died instantly. For a moment no one moved. Nico turned slowly. The color drained from his face. Gabriel, he whispered. It's strange how silence works in moments like that. The room seemed to shrink around the two men as Gabriel stepped forward, his expression calm but impossibly focused. Get out of my chair, Gabriel said. Panic moved through the room like electricity. Several guards reached for their weapons, but Gabriel was faster. His shots were precise, controlled, knocking weapons from hands rather than ending lives. The message was clear. This wasn't chaos. This was correction. Nico backed away, his confidence collapsing under the weight of reality. You're supposed to be dead, he said. That was your first mistake, Gabriel replied. For a moment it looked as though Nico might try to fight. But then his eyes flicked toward the side of the room, where Donatello Rossi's hand moved toward his jacket. Maya saw it too. Before Rossi could draw the weapon, she grabbed a heavy silver serving platter and hurled it across the room. It struck Rossi hard enough to throw off his aim. The shot fired harmlessly into the wall. Gabriel turned instantly. One clean movement ended the threat. When the room finally settled again, Nico was on the floor and the other leaders were already retreating toward the exits. Power shifts quickly when survival becomes the priority. Gabriel stood over his former second-in-command for a long moment. Then he holstered his weapon. I'm not killing you, he said quietly. Nico looked up, confused. Why? Because living with what you did will last longer than dying for it. Within minutes the room had emptied. Only Gabriel and Maya remained standing beneath the city lights. She removed the glasses slowly, suddenly looking much more like the woman who had tackled him in that restaurant days earlier. Gabriel smiled in a way she had never seen before. "You're fired," he said. Maya blinked. "What? You're a terrible waitress," he said calmly. "You drop trays. You throw silverware." Then he held out his hand. "But I do have another position open." She looked at the skyline beyond the glass walls, at the empire that had nearly destroyed them both. "What's the job?" she asked. "Partner," Gabriel said. And if you really think about it, the most dangerous thing that ever happened to Gabriel Moretti wasn't the sniper's bullet. It was the moment a tired waitress saw a red on his chest and decided not to look away. Because sometimes the person who changes the entire game isn't the one with power. It's the one who has nothing left to lose. If you enjoyed this story, let me know what you think. And here's a question I always come back to when I think about Maya's decision that night. If you saw that red, would you run? Or would you stay? When I step back and look at the entire story of Maya Lynwood and Gabriel Moretti, what stays with me the most is not the gunfire, the betrayal, or even the power struggles. What truly stays with me is the moment that started everything. A quiet waitress saw a small red dot on someone's chest. Most people would have frozen. Most people would have looked away and hoped it wasn't their problem. But Maya didn't. She acted in a fraction of a second, and that single decision changed the course of 2 lives and an entire empire. Stories like this remind us of something deeper about human nature. We often imagine that life-changing moments arrive with warning signs, preparation, and time to think. In reality, the moments that shape our lives usually arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and demand a decision before we feel ready. Maya wasn't trained for danger. She wasn't powerful, wealthy, or influential. She was simply someone who had learned to observe the world carefully and trust her instincts when something didn't feel right. The deeper lesson here is not about bravery in dramatic situations. It is about awareness, courage, and responsibility in everyday life. Many opportunities and turning points appear in small details that most people ignore. Sometimes it is noticing a chance to help someone. Sometimes it is recognizing a risk before others see it. And sometimes it is having the courage to act even when you are not certain about the outcome. In our daily lives, we may never face a moment as dramatic as Maya's, but we constantly face smaller versions of the same choice. Do we step forward when something feels wrong, or do we step back and let the moment pass? Do we trust our instincts and act with integrity, or do we stay silent because it feels safer? Very often, the people who end up changing their own lives are not the strongest or the richest. They are simply the ones who decide not to look away. So here is something I'd genuinely like to ask you. If you were in Maya's position and saw that red dot appear on someone's chest, what do you think you would do? Would you run? Or would you step in and try to help? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your answer down in the comments so everyone in this community can see different perspectives and learn from each other. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the Roses Stories channel. Your support helps keep these stories coming and gives us the motivation to continue bringing you more powerful and unforgettable stories in the future.